But first up, we'll talk about the pressing issues. The New Orleans Saints are reported now, and in these strange times, a lot of defining things mentioned today by Coach Sean Payton. And also, the New Orleans Pelicans are set to start their seeding games tomorrow night against Utah in the bubble in Orlando. Joining us now to talk about those topics, a guy who does an outstanding job at Fox 8 Sports, our friend Sean Fazende. And Sean, listen, thanks for the time. I hope you're well.
Thanks for having me, Ken. Good to be here.
All right, so I guess we'll talk about the Saints first with Coach Payton's comments today. Now, the first part, it was obvious to me. Clearly, he's a bit irritated by the whole agreement that was reached between the players and the league. He's not a fan. That was pretty obvious.
You noticed that too, huh? Yeah, I thought that was pretty obvious. Like you, Ken, I've been listening to Sean Payton press conferences for a long time, and you can certainly sense when he's not happy about something, and I think that was pretty evident in that conference call today. He must have mentioned 3 or 4 different times that this is not training camp. Nothing like this is training camp. It's the antithesis of training camp. Spoke about the Players Union and Management Council, the schedule that they put together, or the protocols, whatever the case may be. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I certainly sensed that Sean Payton is not exactly happy with the circumstances, but he's going to roll with the circumstances.
It's, again, the new normal, what we find ourselves immersed in right now, and, of course, it spills over to the NFL as well. 2 tight ends who probably weren't going to figure in the mix opting out. Everybody else appears to be ready to go. On the injury front, I know everybody interested in knowing about what's going on with Marcus Davenport. Seems to be fine. Sheldon Rankins, no news is good news there. Alex Anzalone. But then Kiko Alonso. Coach Payton did say today that he would be a bit limited initially.
Yeah, it makes sense given the timing of his injury when it occurred, the fact that he's had 3 ACL injuries. So not exactly surprising, and it certainly sounded from Payton's voice that it's a cautious approach with him, just given the timetable of his return. But it didn't seem like it was something that was going to linger too far. At least I didn't pick up on that when he was talking about it earlier on his conference call. But really, that seemed to be the only player he mentioned by name. Seems like the roster seems to have a pretty clean bill of health right now, which is certainly something every roster wants to have going into training camp or into a season. Not every team is blessed with that. So it certainly looks like on the injury front, given the injuries that they had to suffer last year, that most guys seem to be on the right path to recovery.
Well, we heard about plexiglass in the locker room. Of course, media won't be allowed in there. And in meeting rooms, they'll be distanced. But I think Payton, really stated it best, and I think this is kind of what we're seeing in society today. He talked about putting up all the shields you want, moving the chairs 6 feet apart, walking around, staying in 6 feet lines. But then, for nearly 3 hours, they got to hit each other and play football. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like what we're seeing in society today. Okay, wear a mask into the establishment, but once you get into the establishment, you take it off to eat and drink and so forth and so on. So it really is a reflection of society, but I think it just paints the dark picture that we're all experiencing right now.
Yeah, and I think it was a pretty realistic tone from Sean Payton just about the protocols and the lack of normalcy, if you will, the adjustments everyone's going to have to make, and then the starch reality of, there's a chance. He even mentioned at this point that he foresees at some point the possibility of suspended games, and not unlike what you're seeing with the Major League Baseball right now with the Miami Marlins, because you just never know if an outbreak happens and it causes a team to not be able to play a game, and there could be some suspended games at some point. Something that he said the NFL should have hopefully have factored into the equation, which I'm sure they have. But that was the last thing he said in that press conference was the line about, at the end of the day, we can put all the protocols up, safety, plexiglass, 6 feet, social distancing, not shake hands, whatever the case may be. But we're playing once the pads come on, especially, it is 2 to 2.5 hours every day in training camp of tackle football, and that is the ultimate challenge. And he was right. And there really is you can't be fully confident in it, because no one can be fully confident in the COVID-19 situation, not just in football, but around the country and really around the world right now. It really is sort of these 2 to 3 week intervals that we kind of keep living by, and you just hope to manage day by day as best you can.
visiting with Sean Fazende of Fox 8 Sports. And, of course, the practice situation. August 12th starting, and then padded practices beginning August 17th. I mean, I'm doing the math. It's well under a month in terms of getting ready for the first game. I can't imagine we're going to see the sharpest performances of the sharpest teams at any point in September, although certainly the veteran teams have more of a chance to be that type of team.
Yeah, and, under normal circumstances, Ken, September football is not always the greatest. It takes teams a while to kind of find their footing a little bit. So throw this extra layer of COVID-19 and restrictions and what you can and can't do. And like you just mentioned, August 17th when the pads come on. So you're talking about, less than a month to gear up for, football season with no preseason. Absolutely. I could see it being a transitional period of some ugly football in September. You could make a case that the Saints, like San Francisco, like perhaps Kansas City or a handful of other teams around the National Football League have the advantage because there's such familiarity. They've been together for a long time. A lot of their roster has returned, but, nothing's a given. You don't know what's going to happen. So it's an unfamiliar path they have to travel. And I think that's the tone you absolutely picked up from Sean Payton today is he knows it's going to be difficult, but he's just going to have to manage as best way as he can. And it's going to be one of the biggest challenges of his career, but it's, everyone's dealing with the same challenges. So it's not like he's alone in it. So, but away we go. Football season is here, ready or not.
The other issue he addressed regarding players was the whole dynamic regarding the center position and who we would see there. Would it be Eric McCoy again, or will it be Cesar Ruiz? And he basically said they're going to rotate and take a good look at it. Do you think they really are undecided, or do you think they really know what they want to do at this stage?
Well, I think the vision is certainly clear. Sean Payton made his boldest statement on draft night, as I've heard from a first-round pick, when he said we didn't draft this guy to be a backup. So clearly he sees a guy that can step right in and be a starter along their offensive line. But, he hadn't had an off season, and, the lineman is certainly different. Eric McCoy last year was able to step in day one and be a starter, but there's no guarantee. But I do think he's going to be given every possible opportunity to get that job. He would probably have to lose that job or just show that he's not ready once the pads come on and actual, real football takes place. But it certainly feels like the path is Ruiz at center, McCoy sliding over to guard, unless it's clear that Ruiz is not ready. In that case, McCoy maybe stays at center. Maybe Nick Easton fills in at guard temporarily. Who knows? But it certainly feels like Ruiz is sort of the front runner to be one of the 5 starters on the offensive line.
Before we talk about the Pelicans, what would you consider to be your area of concern, if there is one area of concern regarding the Saints in 2020 heading into training camp?
Yeah, I think depth-wise, the only position that I look at and say they could probably use another veteran would be that outside cornerback position. You have Marshawn Lattimore, you have Janoris Jenkins, who's 32 years old, as your outside guys. You have P.J. Williams at the nickel, and you have Patrick Robinson, and of course, Gardner Johnson can play there. But on the outside, it's going to get a little thin once you get past their top 2. You can certainly slide P.J. Williams out if you had to, but that's not the ideal situation. And behind those 2 guys, you really have a couple of undrafted rookies and a couple of really kind of no names in terms of what you have. So that would probably be the biggest concern as I look right now at this roster. There aren't many holes. It would be the depth at cornerback position, because I just think they could probably use another veteran there.
You never have enough corners. That's one of the oldest axioms in all of football at any level. Turning our attention to the Pelicans, of course, the season resumption begins tomorrow evening, what they call the seeding games, 8 games to be played. It opens with a bang against Utah, a team that's always been a tough matchup for New Orleans, but Utah without a key piece in Bogdanovich, their second leading scorer, certainly that's going to hurt them. The question is, will New Orleans have its star player, Zion Williamson? Alvin Gentry said it's going to be a game-time decision, basically, or a game-day decision. My suspicion is he'll play. I don't know if he'll start or how much he'll play, but I'm thinking he's going to play. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think he plays. And look, I think Gentry's telling the truth. I don't think there's any real need for gamesmanship right now. just in terms of, does he play, does he not play? Probably just following doctor's orders just in terms of what he had to go through to come back and whatever kind of practice time he was able to accumulate, before tomorrow night's game. I guess we'll see. But I do expect him to play. Look, like most of these guys, there's going to be somewhat of a minute restriction just on the entire team. You have to rely on your depth quite a bit in this kind of restart, especially in the beginning of it. But I would expect Zion to play. We saw how well the Pelicans did in their scrimmage / exhibition, whatever you want to call it, over the last week and a half. But Zion is clearly their guy. So, and look, when we saw that picture of him a couple of weeks ago, he looked as good a shape as he has ever been in since he's been here in New Orleans. So I do expect him to play probably a smaller number of minutes, at least for the first game or two. But look, they need him. And look, in this 8-game stretch, they're going to need as many wins as they possibly can get. And it's a tough matchup, like you said, against the Jazz. So, yeah, I think they're going to rely on him. I think they're going to need him. So, yes, I do think he plays.
Yep, I'm with you. Again, no Bogdanovich, and then you wonder about any lingering rift between Gobert and Mitchell, even though they say things are fine, makes you wonder a little bit about that. Then they'll play the Clippers in Game 2, and the Clippers won't have Lou Williams in Game 2. So you can make the argument they're catching teams at the right time. They've got to win one of these two games, and they've got to beat Memphis. I mean, that's the scenario I see. They got to win at least 5 out of 8. Realistically, 6 out of 8 will get them where they need to be, but they can't afford to get off to an 0-2 start going into that game with Memphis.
Oh, absolutely. Completely agree. And we'll say this, and I don't know if you picked up on this, Ken, but just, the last, month or so, 6 weeks, whatever the case may be, and I'm not, I don't have, knowledge of other teams or what they've been saying or commenting leading up to the bubble. But it just feels like to me that the Pelicans really do have the right mindset, and they really do have players that want to be there and see this as an opportunity. And hopefully that shows up on the court. It just feels like from a mental standpoint, a mentality standpoint, it's an inconvenient situation going into a bubble away from your family, having to deal with, crazy circumstances. But it just felt like, at least just the reports you read or just the vibe you pick up, the Pelicans, maybe more than any other team, had the right mindset going in or have the right mindset going in. And J.J. Redick said it best a couple of weeks back when he said, I think so much of this success is going to depend on who has the right mindset, and it certainly feels like the Pelicans do. So if they bring that into the games when they start counting, I do like their chances. But I'm with you. I don't know if going 0-2 to start, that would put you behind the 8 ball, where you're probably going to have to get at least 5, maybe even 6 victories in this 8-game stretch.
You mentioned depth earlier, and I've been saying it really since the beginning of the season. I don't know that any team is deeper than the Pelicans. They're not the best team in the NBA, not by a long shot yet. Or they're not in that class, but they're working their way up the ladder. But in terms of depth, I don't know that anybody has a better 1 through 12 or 1 through 13 than they have. They realistically have a problem with parceling out minutes because you've got a lot of options. You've got 10 guys legitimately that have to play, and that doesn't even include the 2 guards, Frank Jackson, who was playing pretty well before the break, and then Alexander Walker, who was their leading scorer in these 3 scrimmage games.
Yeah. The depth is good, and it's young depth, it's quality depth, and it's guys that were hitting their stride, even before the season was stopped, and really picked back up and looked, and you sort of felt it in those scrimmages. So, and when you're talking about a tight situation, a situation where depth is going to be needed, just given the spacing between games, what you're going to have to do, the time away and the reacclimation back to the basketball, court when the games count, because the intensity picks up. We all know that. You're going to need quality depth, and name a team where you can legitimately give legitimate minutes to all 12 guys or 13 guys, and it'd be hard to find anyone other than the Pelicans. So hopefully that's an asset that they can use, and they can ride that into whatever form of postseason they can hopefully qualify for. But if quality depth is one of the reasons when we look back on this team or we look back on the season is one of the reasons people succeed inside the bubble, and perhaps the Pelicans will be one of those teams, and we'll see. I mean, and look, I go back to that mindset because it also feels like they are, when the season ended, they were kind of the outside looking in when in terms of the postseason picture when we were talking playoffs with the Pelicans. They kind of needed to stack a few at that time, but now it's like a renewed sense of excitement because there is a realistic chance to get there. So you combine all those factors, and I don't blame fans for being optimistic going inside when the Pelicans get inside the bubble.
Yeah, I mean, you have to temper the enthusiasm to some degree because the scrimmages were, after all, scrimmages. They were practice games, and it wasn't that long ago that we recall the Pelicans being 5-0 in the preseason, right? And then Williamson went down, and then they lost 13 straight, and we know the rest of the story. So while you don't get overly excited, I agree and concur with what you said earlier. I think their mindset is as good as any, if not better. They were all in on this. Nobody even thought about not showing up. They all showed up. They're motivated. They've got 4 veteran players who are good leaders as well as good players. And they've got a great young nucleus and core that's hungry and eager to prove themselves. And I think we're seeing the evidence of that. It's going to be interesting off the bat, in my estimation, because you're going to see more people play initially because of the unique circumstances. You almost had to start all over again with the training camp. So I don't think you're going to see guys playing 40 minutes plus right away. And then, of course, Williamson won't play as much early on either. So we might see 10 to 12 early on as compared to a 9-man rotation.
And and if that's true across the board, not just with the Pelicans, like we just talked about with their depth, I mean, you got to where they stand in that regard, just because other teams just don't have that many quality basketball players inside the bubble. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think anyone's real, naive to think that this team's gonna run the table here. I think we're all realistic, but to have some success, finish out on a high note, possibly get into the postseason, given where the season started. I think that would be a nice little wrap up to the Pelican season, and it all gets underway. It all gets underway Thursday against Utah. So let's ride this thing out, see how good they do.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Final thought: you think they make the postseason? I do. I felt that way before this even convened because of the play-in spot at 9. I think they definitely are better than Sacramento, who they played twice. I think they're better than Portland. I think they're better than San Antonio, especially without Aldridge. I think they're better than Phoenix, and I really think they're better than Memphis. You agree?
Yeah, I do. Mainly, I think that getting into that 9th seeded play-in, 2 out of 3, whatever you want to call it, 9 versus 8, I think it's a very realistic possibility, even if you don't get into the top 8 to get to that point. So I think they got to win about 6 games. Maybe they catch a break if they only win 5, but I like where this team stands, and I do. I think they can make a run at this thing and get into some form of postseason inside the bubble in Orlando.
Follow him on Twitter at Sean Fazende Fox 8. That's at Sean Fazende Fox 8. Watch him on Fox 8 as well, where he does a great job as always. Sean, listen, thanks so much for the time tonight. Hey, it's great. We're going to see some real professional sports here very shortly in New Orleans, or at least
can't wait.
New Orleans teams, right?
Absolutely. Can't wait. Thanks for having me, Ken.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Okay, Sean. Thank you.